forget rockets. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, all these guys, they're wasting their money. We don't need rockets. Today's technology has been based upon control of the electromagnetic field with relatively small amounts of energy and power, watts, right? The new technology, which is now it's basically control of the gravitational field with small amounts of energy. Now, I must say, let me tell you a little bit of my background. I'm 86 years old and born in 1939, beginning of World War II. And I was sent to Cornell in the late 50s. My professors built the atomic bomb. Hans Bethe, and all the people, Oppenheimer's group. In the late 50s, Ivy League schools, very much like Cambridge and Oxford, were also recruiting grounds for the three-letter agency. Okay, so I'm not in the CIA and those things, but I am what's called the consultant asset, right? So, I'm a scientist. And over 50 years ago, I was basically recruited into a black project, you might say. Now, it's not totally black, because there's a book, How the Hippies Saved Physics, came out in 2011. It was actually awarded the best popular physics book by the British Physical Society, by MIT professor David Kaiser. Talks about some of what I'm talking about. And basically, in the late 60s, early 70s, I was a young professor, assistant professor of physics at San Diego State. I went to UCSD before that. And back then, San Diego's a big Navy town. So we also ran some Navy programs for what's called college education, on sending professors on ships to teach math and physics, things like that to the CIA. Well, in any case, so I was asked, I was asked by representatives of the Central Intelligence Agency and the Department of Defense to work on two problems. Basically pulled out of academia. And problem number one, they want to know, how does consciousness work? They mean the physics. What is there in biological matter that generates inner conscious experiences? Okay? And that's problem number one. But the second one is, remember this back 50 years ago, how do flying saucers fly? All right? And so that is control of gravity. Now, you get Elon Musk. What is Elon Musk saying these days? He wants to create Starfleet Academy, and he wants to make Star Trek real. Now, I've been saying those. I actually coined the phrase "make Star Trek real," and the other thing I can tell you is that a lot of the science fiction movies are actually preparations by the intelligence agencies, including the British and the American and even the Mossad, all of them, even the Russians actually, to prepare what's called disclosure, that we're not alone in the universe, and we are being prepared for to join the Galactic Federation. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is that all of these movies, and by the way, I had something to do with the creation of some of these movies, like Back from the Future. I'm actually the inspiration for Emmett Brown in Back to the Future. That's in the book, How the Hippies Saved Physics. This is San Francisco North Beach, 1970s. Francis Ford Coppola was a buddy of mine, and part of his Rat Pack, met Spielberg and all these people. Introduced Jacques Vallée, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Star Trek. Oh, by the way, okay, so Star Trek, I must say, Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek, was part of this project. And Roddenberry's whole idea for Star Trek, this could sound pretty crazy, but he was involved with a guy named Andrea Puhari, who was U.S. Army intelligence and CIA type of guy. He brought Uri Geller from Israel to, Uri Geller, the Israeli psychic. Any case, they had a group in New York, I guess around the 70s, where they were doing channeling from this extraterrestrial entity, the Nine, and all this stuff. And the material for Star Trek is really based on these channelings, contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. Now, I know it's going to freak out a lot of people, but this is, I'm giving it to you. But basically what I'm trying to tell you is that we're calling it Manhattan Project 2.0. And it is happening now. It's funded. And what I can say is that I could be wrong. Everything in science could be mistaken, right? But the way it's looking right now is that within 3 or 4 years, hopefully we'll have our own kind of like flying saucer. We'll have these drones, that are controlling their local gravitational field. Forget rockets, everything, everything Johansson said, of course, is correct given that technology, but we don't need any of that technology. So this is a total replacement. No more jet planes, even battleships, aircraft. Well, we don't need aircraft carriers anymore anyway, they're obsolete, they're floating targets. But it's all going to be controlled in gravity, basically warp drive. But like Emmett Brown, the DeLorean, that's what I'm talking about. And the other thing is that, again, this is all, I could be wrong, because science, you have to, science has to be proper falsifiable, has to be capable of being proved wrong. But the way it looks right now is that also by 2030, 2035, around that time, we should have these conscious, the room temperature quantum computers will also have our consciousness. Now, some of you may know Roger Penrose. Roger Penrose, a professor, he got a Nobel Prize just last year with Blackwell with Hawking. Well, Hawking, I guess, didn't get the prize, but Penrose got the prize. He, based on black hole stuff work that he did. But he also, he's a retired professor at Oxford. And we actually worked together a little bit at London around 50 years ago. But the point is, with this anesthesiologist named Stuart Hameroff in Arizona, University of Arizona, they explain the generation of human consciousness, our subjective experiences, who we are, like, in terms of subneural structures called microtubules, okay? And what we're doing in Manhattan Project 2.0 is simply using nanotechnology, current technology, to create artificial microtubules, which is imitating ourselves, but in silicon and solid state, and technically they're called quantum dot artificial neural nets. Well, the eye for these, there's a neural net in here, right? And I forget what the scale of these are. Maybe it's 10 nanometers, something like that. But right now, like the Apple chip and all these new quantum chips that are coming out, they're down to the 3 nanometer scale. Nanometer is a billionth of a meter, okay? The M5, I think, chip is, I think, a 3 nanometer technology. Now, our microtubules are like 8 to 10 nanometer technology. In fact, let me tell you an interesting story. So it's like the 1980s, the University of Arizona Hospital, and this guy, Stuart Hameroff, he's a young anesthesiologist, smart guy though, and he noticed what, they were doing the first, I guess, electron microscope pictures of our microtubules, okay? And what he seemed to, I don't know exactly how, I'm not a doctor, medical man, but he got, what happens when a microtubule is, consider like a corn cob with the little kernels of corn, okay? Each little kernel of corn is what's called a protein dimer. It's a protein molecule, and it like opens and closes. It's a switch, it's a molecular switch. It's controlled by a single electron cell. We won't go into all the details, but it's basically a switch. Just like computers are based on switches, right? Switching networks, computers. Okay, so what he thought of, and I don't know, is that he says, well, the anesthetic molecule gets caught inside the pocket of this protein, and it jams the protein, the switch doesn't work, and the patient loses consciousness. Okay, so he brought that electron microscope picture over to Intel, Silicon Valley, back in like 1985, something like that, right? And the computer guy said, what chip is that? We're computers. We are molecular, organic molecular quantum computers. That's what we are, down at the level. And it turns out the mathematics is very simple, not difficult. It's all applied quantum mechanics. And so we understand the process. When a physicist says he understands the process, that means we can make a machine that'll do it. And that's where we're at right now. And so now it turns out I gotta say something here. Prince Philip. The Prince was very interested in flying saucers. When I was publishing some of my stuff in the late 90s and early 2000s, I had a program that could tell me who was downloading my stuff, and the server was Windsor Castle. Well, I don't know who it's probably the Prince, right? I don't think it was the Queen, but it's probably the Prince, and maybe it was Charles. I don't know, but it's interesting that we're in the Prince Philip room. Okay, so I think I'll stop here and just take questions. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you very much. Fascinating. I love hearing the stories from 50 years ago. So thank you so much for sharing. Can I ask back on the physics bit? So
Pardon me?
Can I ask about the physics element?
Yes.
When you say that we're very close to solving gravity.
Yes.
When you were studying the flying saucers for the lack of better word, have you observed any sign of propulsion? And are we looking at
Yeah, we understand exactly.
Or are we looking at warping within it? Which way are we gonna go?
Yeah, we understand
I'm all for it, but just which way?
It's warp drive, it's control of gravity. The problem, okay, let me get a little history of gravity from Einstein. Einstein in, 1905, Einstein creates the special theory of relativity. That's the atomic bomb, equals mc squared, time dilation, length contraction, all that stuff. That's 1905. But he then tried to explain gravity, connecting it somehow to Newton's theory of gravity, and he couldn't do it, and he struggled for 10 years. He almost had a nervous breakdown. Einstein, contrary to popular belief, he was not that good a mathematician. He was an intuitive genius, his physical intuition, And so, and he had a friend called Marcel Grossman, who was a mathematician, who helped him and taught him this new mathematics called tensor calculus. Tensor calculus, okay? And in 10 years, so it took him 10 years, and then it turns out these mathematicians, Hermann Weyl was this genius mathematician in Göttingen. the time and started working on the problem too. And there was like a race at the end who would actually come out with the field equation first. In any case, so in 1915, Einstein publishes his gravity field equations. It's it's a tensor field equation, okay? And of course it works, you know. In fact, everything that Roger Penrose and Hawking do, it's all based on that one equation. The 1915 classical tensor equation. Then there's also now the problem of connecting with quantum mechanics, which is what, you know, basically what I'm doing. And the flying saucer technology has to do with quantum spin corrections to Einstein's 1915 equation. In other words, Einstein always knew this, by the way. Einstein always knew his field equation was tentative. It was incomplete. He knew it was incomplete. And in fact, he called the field equation, you know, so the equation has a left side and right side, okay? So say the left side equation is the gravity or the flying saucer warp field, gravity field, okay? And the right side is the source of that field, which is something called the stress energy momentum tensor of matter, but it's multiplied by a coupling coefficient, you know, like a transducer, or the coupling strength. In other words, how does material stress energy densities generate gravity? There's a certain coupling coefficient in the equation. Now, it turns out that coupling is a very small number. See, it's a very small number in Einstein's theory, which agrees, by the way, with astronomy. It agrees with almost everything, except artificial materials that we can make. So the point is, everybody knew from Einstein's 1915 field equation, yeah, we can control gravity, but it takes so much energy that forget it. You know, we can't do it. And that's what most physicists even today think. Okay, now we have to get into the intelligence stuff. Okay, you know, the cloak and dagger and everything. These flying, you know, these things have been around for thousands of years. It's in the Bible, Ezekiel's vision, all that stuff. It's in the Bible. I won't go into that. If you look at Renaissance paintings, you'll see they paint pictures of the flying saucers back, 500 years ago. Okay, and then, so the first thing that happened in the recent times, you all heard of Roswell, right? Okay. Well, have you heard of magenta? Okay, you heard of magenta. Magenta is the Italian 1933 Mussolini time. It's warp drive.
It's warp drive.
Okay, and it's also time travel. Now, okay, gravity is space-time. In relativity, in Newtonian, old physics, Newtonian 18th, 17th century physics, time and space are separated. In special relativity, time and space are unified to space-time four-dimensional continuum. Okay? Einstein's theory of gravity is the curving. Instead of space-time being like a flat sheet, it's more like a malleable rubber sheet. And the weight you put on it to bend the sheet, that's the stress energy tensor. Okay? So, but the problem is that coupling is too weak. Einstein in 1915, there was no quantum mechanics in it. Quantum mechanics was just beginning. And there was nothing, they didn't know that the electrons, like a little gyroscope, has a spin, and also the nucleons in the nuclear matter, they're spinning, okay? They're like spinning top, so to speak. When Einstein published his gravity tensor equation in 1915, the discovery of the electron spin was 10 years in the future, so he didn't know it, okay? But now when you put in the electron spin correction, there's additional terms, and Einstein knew that. In fact, he used to say that the left side of his equation, the pure gravity of the curvature of space-time, which is a beautiful structure, he called that marble. And he called the source with the coupling, with the weak coupling, he called that wood. He didn't like it, So he always had a sense that his theory was not complete. So when you add the spin, it turns out that the coupling coefficient is, for electrons, it's 40 powers of 10 stronger. You know, it's the same, actually it's the same strength as the electromagnetic force. So it's like electrogravity, okay, electromagnetic force. And for nuclear matter, it's 1/1,000,000th of that, but it's still pretty big. All right, so that's the secret. That's what nobody knows. That's what we've discovered, okay? That's what this is all based on. And once we know that, it's just about straightforward engineering physics work, and we have the facilities now to do it. So that's the answer. That the quantum spin gravity corrections to the traditional textbook theory is what explains the flying saucers. It's all okay, and that's why we don't rockets. Forget the rockets, and you also have wormholes. Stargates. So we go, okay, so let me stop here and take some more questions.
Yeah, thank you. I think the whole, it makes sense to me what you said, just considering that most of the mass in an object comes from subatomic movement, so inertia in the atom itself. When we kind of scale up the tech and make those kind of materials,
yeah.
They themselves would be conscious. So how would we actually maintain coherence between the consciousness of a fuselage?
Yeah.
Don't we get
good question. Okay, you've been reading my things or something, right?
I'm a fan of Haveroff.
Okay. Oh, Haveroff.
Then our homework.
Excellent question. Okay, now one thing I forgot to mention, this is also going to blow people's minds because it's a little bit scary. These flying saucers are living, they're conscious, but they're solid state, they're the stuff that I'm talking about, okay? Because we're material, we're molecular room temperature biological machines. They are also conscious, and I have all kinds of semi-classified things which I better not say about incidents with these. Well, what I can say is because it's public, people from Seoul, the Seoul conference, Gary Nolan is a professor of, I guess medicine, but it's like bioengineering at Stanford professor, okay? And also he's a very successful entrepreneur, Silicon Valley, he's created companies, he's a multimillionaire, he's, any case, the CIA went to him a couple of years ago because there had been at least over 100 military personnel who have gotten very sick, kind of like a radiation sickness, from too close contact with the UFOs, And he has a machine that'll analyze the blood of the. In any case, he has the most advanced stuff. So this guy brought these blood samples for Gary to study, okay? And we know the reason for the sickness is that in the warp drive, you have what's called, like one part, say you're standing beneath a hovering flying disc, okay? You don't want to do that. Never stand for too long under something that's hovering, that's not moving, because at the bottom it's an anti-gravity field, which we understand how to do that now, but that creates a blue shift, which means that if there's any kind of air molecules, anything that's under there, they're going to start getting a lot of energy, and it's basically radiation sickness. And in fact, I don't know if some of you have seen, is it History Channel, Unidentified? The Skinwalker Ranch. Does anybody know about the Skinwalker Ranch series? It's on History Channel. A guy, an army physicist I work with, named Travis Taylor, he actually did stay, he actually got somewhat sick, but he, luckily he's okay now, but he had to go, And several other people working up at this ranch where they're having these phenomena, they've also, gotten the radiation sickness. And it's a little similar to the Havana syndrome that you hear about. Okay, so does that answer your question? or more?
Partially, my concern was when we build these things,
Yeah.
how do we maintain
Oh,
friendship?
you're worried about the decoherence.
Yeah.
Yeah, the wall, yeah, the Hammeroff, it's because, yes, okay, I know. Stewart, Hammeroff, and Penrose, they have this, they say, well, you need a quantum coherent field. In other words, in quantum mechanics, you have like little wave functions. The wave function, and you also have particles. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details, but I'm only going to talk about what's called the David Bohm interpretation. Bohm was, at the end, was a professor here at Berkeley College, University of London. The point is that in order for there to be a conscious mind, you have to have a giant coherent quantum wave. It's basically like, you can think of it as a soul if you want. And in other words, every part of your body is this coherent quantum information field, okay? The problem is that there's Max Tegmark and everybody says, oh, no, it can't work because it'll decode, you can't create such a field. But that's wrong, because what Tegmark was assuming, that you're in thermodynamic equilibrium. And in thermodynamic equilibrium, that's true. But there's a whole other thing called non-equilibrium statistical mechanics, where now you have, and in fact, there was a man named Ilya Prigogine, got the Nobel Prize for, I'm telling you, back years ago, in Brussels, called non-equilibrium dissipative structures. So the physics changes as soon as you get into this far off equilibrium situation. And then you have something called the Freilich condensate, which is, it's like it's like, where we are very analogous to lasers. We are biological lasers, except the laser beam is not photons. That's not photon. It's not a coherent photon beam. There are certain, so I have to give you like solid state physics. We have what's called condensed matter physics. And there was another physicist named P.W. Anderson from Bell Labs, also Nobel Prize for, I'm about to tell you. More is different. More is different. As you go from, say, the subnuclear level, quarks, and W mesons and things like that, gluons, and then you go up to nuclear matter, protons and neutrons, which are composites of the quarks, right? And then you go up to atoms and electrons and then molecules and solid state condensed matter systems. Now I'm talking about condensed matter. This is where the nanotechnology, this only happens in certain kinds of materials. What we are, living matter is the technical, we are float wave pumped Freilich condensates. But what that does, that mechanism is a well-known mechanism, which several Nobel Prizes have been given pieces of it, but it was never put together in quite the way I'm saying. We are macro quantum coherent room temperature, actually post-quantum molecular computers. That's what we are. Because living matter, it's sort of like laser. What is food? When you eat your food, the metabolism, some of you guys talked about, you have the ATP, all these molecular energy mechanisms. That's this, mathematically speaking, the way of theoretical physics thinks in terms of math, mathematically, that's the same, functionally speaking, as a laser pump. As you pump into energy in laser, and as the phase transition, you get the coherent beam out. So that's basically what's happening. We are biological analogs to lasers. We're non-equilibrium systems, and then you can show from the pumping energy that protects you against the decoherence. So that's and then the reason we age and die is because that pumping mechanism is deteriorating. DNAs and all that stuff. So we understand that, and what Tegmark said, what you were talking, was a valid point, but that's because Tegmark was not aware of the non-equilibrium part of it. He left, given his assumptions, what he said was true, but the assumption was wrong. I mean,
Can we go farther? Can we go farther than the Mars and the Moon? The range of the vehicles, like how far can we go?
the exoplanets, the stars are our destination. Forget, I mean, Elon, see, I actually have to have a personal conversation with Elon to sort of set him straight on all this stuff. I mean, he's thinking too small. I mean, he's split, there are two Elons. He does talk about making Star Trek real, going to the exoplanets, but there's no way he can do that with chemical rockets. In fact, it's even hard to get to the Mars. It takes months to get to Mars, 6 months, whatever. But with these things, you get there, in an hour. Because you're folding space and time.
How can the consciousness aspect help us in space travel of the craft?
I don't know if it's going to help us or hurt, but it's there. You can't get. Okay, there's another point of physics. There is a guy who used to work with named Leonard Susskind, who's a professor of physics at Stanford. And he thought the world is a hologram, that we're living like the Matrix, the movie The Matrix. And so the point is, it turns out, he calls it, he says general relativity equals quantum mechanics. Okay, I'll just use it. The point is, one, you cannot have this warp drive I'm talking about. You cannot control gravity with small amounts of energy density without also generating some kind of consciousness in the process. It's like a duality. Okay, it's like a wave particle, it's like a mind-matter duality sort of speak. So, but exactly how it helps in terms of morality and things like that, I don't. I mean, in terms like good and evil and love and hate, well, that's a whole separate issue. To make an analogy, like in the old days, the old technology, you had tape recorders, okay? I'm just talking about how to make the tape. I'm not talking about what you're going to put on the tape. I'm only talking about the hardware, I'm not talking about the software. Okay, that's a whole other issue. That's for the theology and people like that, the religious part.
Thank you very much, Jack. It was an honor.